We've all been there. You see their name pop up on your phone or you see them walking down the hallway, and your stomach immediately drops. You're already rehearsing the argument you're about to have. But here's the problem. When you prepare for a fight, you've already lost your peace. I want to give you 3 ways to handle a difficult personality without losing your cool or your dignity. First, I want you to use the mirror question. When they come at you with a projection or an unfair criticism, don't defend yourself. Defense is an invitation to keep attacking. Instead, ask them, "It sounds like you're frustrated. What is the specific result you're looking for right now?" This forces them to move from their emotions back to the facts. It puts the work back on them. Second, learn the gray rock technique. Difficult people thrive on your reaction. They want the fire. Don't give it to them. Become as uninteresting as a gray rock. Give short, neutral answers like "I see," "perhaps," or "that's an interesting perspective." When you stop providing the fuel, they'll eventually stop looking for the spark. Third, set a time box boundary. You don't have to stay in a draining conversation until it's over. You stay until you decide it's over. Use a phrase like, "I have exactly 5 minutes before my next task, so let's focus on the most important point." This tells them that your time is a limited resource and you aren't available for their chaos. In the arena of human interaction, we often operate under the exhausting illusion that if we just say the right words, use the right logic, or show enough kindness, we can dictate how another person responds to us. We tie our internal peace to an external result that we simply do not own. This is the trap of being attached to the outcome. When you walk into a room to have a difficult conversation, and your goal is to make the other person understand you, apologize to you, or change their mind, you have effectively handed them the keys to your emotional well-being. If they don't give you that apology or that understanding, you leave the interaction feeling defeated, drained, and frustrated. You are essentially telling the world that your happiness is contingent upon someone else's cooperation. Detaching from the outcome is the radical act of reclaiming that power. It is the realization that while you are 100% responsible for the input, your tone, your words, and your integrity, you are 0% responsible for the output. Think about a trial lawyer or a high-level negotiator. They don't go into a room hoping the other side will be nice. They don't expect the person across from them to suddenly become reasonable. If they did, they would be emotionally compromised the moment the other party became aggressive. Instead, they focus entirely on their own process. When you detach from the outcome, you aren't becoming indifferent or cold, you are becoming bulletproof. You are deciding that your character is not up for negotiation based on how someone else behaves. If you are dealing with a difficult personality and they choose to be loud, irrational, or dismissive, that is a reflection of their internal state, not your value. When you remain attached to the outcome, you treat their behavior as a grade on your performance. You think, "If I were better at this, they wouldn't be acting this way." But that is a lie. Difficult people are difficult because of their own history, their own ego, and their own limitations. By detaching, you stop trying to fix their broken weather and instead focus on holding your own umbrella. This shift in perspective changes the way you speak. When you aren't desperate for a specific result, your voice loses that high-pitched edge of anxiety. You stop over-explaining. You stop selling your point of view. There is a profound authority in a person who speaks their truth and then sits back, perfectly comfortable with the possibility that the other person might not like it. This comfort comes from knowing that your job was to be honest and respectful, and you've already succeeded at the moment the words left your mouth. The win happened in your delivery, not in their reception. Most of the stress we experience in our relationships comes from this invisible tug of war where we are trying to pull someone toward a version of themselves that doesn't exist yet. When you drop the rope, the tension vanishes. You realize that you can't lose a game you've stopped playing. You can stay in the room, you can continue the conversation, and you can be present, but the hooks they throw no longer have anything to snag onto. You become a non-stick surface. Imagine the freedom of entering a conflict knowing that no matter what the other person says, your evening isn't ruined. You are no longer waiting for their validation to feel like the conversation was a success. You define success by your own composure. Did you stay calm? Did you speak clearly? Did you maintain your boundaries? If the answer is yes, then you have won, regardless of whether the other person walked away angry or stayed to argue. This is the essence of true confidence. It isn't the belief that everyone will agree with you. It's the certainty that you will be okay even if they don't. You start to see difficult people not as obstacles to your peace, but as weight training for your character. They are providing you with the resistance necessary to build the muscle of self-regulation. The more you practice this detachment, the more you realize that most people's difficult behavior is actually a cry for a reaction. They want to pull you into the mud because they are lonely there. When you refuse to get in the mud, not out of arrogance, but out of a deep commitment to your own mental clarity, you change the entire dynamic of the room. You become the thermostat that sets the temperature, rather than the thermometer that merely reacts to it. You are no longer a victim of the environment. You are the architect of your own internal atmosphere. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about the truth to let it stand on its own, without the need for someone else's signature of approval. When you step into an interaction with a difficult personality, your natural human instinct is to engage as a participant. Your nervous system treats their aggression, their sarcasm, or their passive aggressiveness as a direct threat, triggering a physical response that prepares you to either fight back or flee the scene. This participant mode is exactly where the drama lies. In this state, you are emotionally entangled. You are reacting to their tone, feeling the sting of their words, and searching for a way to defend your ego. But there is a much more powerful position you can occupy, and that is the position of the researcher. Adopting the observer mindset means you mentally take 2 steps back and put on an imaginary lab coat. Instead of experiencing the person's behavior, you begin to study it. You move from the role of a target to the role of a scientist observing a specimen in a controlled environment. This shift is not about being cold or robotic. It is about creating a psychological buffer that prevents their chaos from leaking into your consciousness. When you observe, you are looking for patterns, not pain. You start to see their outbursts not as personal attacks, but as predictable data points. Imagine you are watching a storm from behind a thick pane of reinforced glass. You can see the lightning, you can hear the thunder, and you can observe the wind whipping the trees, but you aren't getting wet. The observer mindset is that glass. When a difficult person begins their routine, perhaps they start gaslighting or they use guilt as a weapon, the researcher in you takes a mental note. You think to yourself, that's an interesting tactic. They are using volume to try and compensate for a lack of evidence. Or notice how they change the subject the moment I ask for a specific date. By labeling their behavior in real time, you engage the analytical part of your brain, which effectively dials down the emotional part. You cannot be intensely curious and intensely angry at the same time. Curiosity is the antidote to triggers. When you are curious about why they chose that specific word or why they always lean in when they're lying, you are no longer a victim of the interaction. You are the one with the clipboard, and they are the ones providing the performance. This objective watchfulness allows you to see the mechanics of the manipulation. Most difficult people have a limited playbook. They have 3 or 4 moves that have worked for them in the past to get their way. As a participant, these moves frustrate you. As an observer, these moves become fascinatingly repetitive. You start to see the tell before the move even happens. You see the slight shift in their posture or the specific sigh they use before they launch into a guilt trip. Because you are watching objectively, you aren't caught off guard, you are prepared. This level of detachment gives you a massive tactical advantage, because while they are spiraling into their emotional drama, you are maintaining total clarity. You are seeing the chessboard while they are just throwing the pieces. You begin to realize that their behavior is actually quite small and desperate. It is a series of defense mechanisms designed to protect a very fragile ego. When you see the why behind the what, the sting disappears. You don't get mad at a toddler for throwing a tantrum because you understand their developmental limitations. The observer mindset allows you to view difficult adults through a similar lens of clinical understanding. Furthermore, this mindset changes your body language in a way that often de-escalates the other person without you saying a word. When you are an observer, you tend to be still. You aren't fidgeting, you aren't interrupting. and your eyes aren't darting around in search of an escape. You are simply watching. This calm, steady gaze can be incredibly disarming to a high conflict personality because they are looking for a specific hit of adrenaline from your reaction. They want to see you flinch, cry, or scream. When they look at you and see a calm researcher taking mental notes, there is nowhere for their energy to go. It's like throwing a ball against a velvet curtain instead of a brick wall. There is no bounce back. You aren't giving them the feedback loop they need to sustain their behavior. By remaining objective, you force them to deal with the silence and the lack of reaction, which often leads them to exhaust themselves much faster. You are essentially outlasting their ego by refusing to feed it. This isn't just a communication strategy, it is a form of mental sovereignty. You are deciding that your internal state is a high security zone and you are the only one with the clearance to enter. By observing the tactics of others, you ensure that you never become a casualty of their internal wars. You stay grounded in the reality of the moment, watching the theater of their personality play out, while you remain safely seated in the front row, untouched and unbothered. In the high-stakes environment of a courtroom or a heated personal confrontation, the most valuable asset you possess is not your intelligence or your quick wit, it is your neutrality. We often mistake anger for power, believing that a raised voice or a sharp tongue signals strength and dominance. However, in the world of effective communication, anger is actually a leak. It is a sign that your defenses have been breached, and that the other person has successfully found a way to bypass your logic and strike at your core. The moment you lose your temper, you have effectively handed the other person the remote control to your nervous system. You are no longer driving the car, they are. By pushing a specific button, whether it's an insult, a lie, or a dismissive comment, they can make you jump, shout, or lose your focus. They become the master of the interaction because they are the ones dictating how you feel. The goal of neutrality is to take that remote control back and put it firmly in your own pocket, ensuring that no matter how much noise the other person makes, they cannot change the frequency of your internal state. Neutrality is not about being a doormat, and it certainly isn't about being passive. True neutrality is an active, aggressive form of self-control. It is the ability to stand in the middle of a burning building and feel the heat without becoming the fire. When you are neutral, you are like a calm harbor in a storm. The waves are crashing all around you, but the water inside the harbor remains still. This stillness is what gives you the clarity to make the right move. Anger narrows your vision. It forces you into a tunnel where you can only see the immediate threat and your desire to strike back. In that tunnel, you lose sight of your long-term goals, your values, and the potential consequences of your words. You might win the moment by saying something devastatingly mean, but you lose the mission because you've damaged your reputation or escalated a situation that could have been resolved with a single, calm sentence. Neutrality keeps the map of the entire interaction visible to you at all times. When you refuse to get angry, you create a massive psychological problem for the difficult personality across from you. Most people who use aggression or manipulation are looking for a hook. They want to snag your emotions so they can pull you into their reality. They expect a certain rhythm to a fight. They yell. You yell back. They insult. You defend. This rhythm is comfortable for them. It's how they operate. But when you meet their heat with a cool, neutral tone, you break the rhythm. You become a blank wall. There is nothing for them to grab onto. This often causes the other person to escalate at first. They will push harder and get louder because they are desperate to find that remote control they used to have. If you can maintain your neutrality through that extinction burst, the power dynamic shifts completely. They begin to look irrational, even to themselves, while you look like the only adult in the room. Your lack of anger becomes a mirror that reflects their own instability back at them, and that is far more powerful than any retort you could ever scream. To maintain this state, you have to change your internal dialogue about what anger actually is. You have to start seeing anger as a tactical error. Every time you feel that heat rising in your chest, you should tell yourself, I am about to give them control. Is this person worth my autonomy? Usually the answer is a resounding no. Why would you give a person you don't even like the power to ruin your mood, affect your blood pressure, or dictate your behavior? When you frame it as a matter of sovereignty, neutrality becomes a point of pride. It becomes a game of seeing how much chaos they can create without it touching you. You start to find a quiet satisfaction in your own composure. You realize that your silence and your steady, level voice are your most lethal weapons. They signal to the other person that their best shots are missing the target. You aren't avoiding the conflict, you are transcending it. You are staying in the pocket, eyes open, breathing steadily, and waiting for the moment when their emotional storm runs out of rain. This is the ultimate win. In any human interaction, to walk away with your dignity intact, your heart rate normal, and the knowledge that you remained the master of yourself from the first word to the last. By choosing neutrality, you are deciding that no one gets to move your spirit unless you give them permission. You are the only one with the code to your peace, and as long as you stay neutral, that code remains unbroken. In the world of high conflict communication, the greatest danger is word vomit. The tendency to say too much because we are anxious, defensive, or trying to prove our point. When you are dealing with a difficult personality, every extra word you speak is a potential weapon you are handing to them. They will take your explanations and turn them into arguments. They will take your emotional appeals and label them as instability. To protect yourself, you need a structured filter for every text, email, and conversation. This is where the BIFF framework becomes your tactical shield. BIFF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. It is a communication method designed specifically to lower the temperature of an interaction while simultaneously drawing a hard line in the sand. It is not about being nice. In a traditional sense, it is about being strategically professional so that there is no room for the other person to continue the drama. By following this structure, you shift from a reactive state to a controlled state, ensuring that the interaction ends on your terms rather than spiraling into a never-ending cycle of back and forth bickering. The first pillar is being brief. In a digital age where we feel the need to justify every move, brevity is a superpower. When you are brief, you offer no hooks. Most people, when faced with an accusation, respond with 3 paragraphs of defense. The difficult personality sees those 3 paragraphs and finds 5 different sentences to disagree with, and the argument lives on for another day. When you are brief, sticking to 2 or 3 sentences, there is nothing for them to grab onto. You aren't giving them context they didn't ask for or history they will only weaponize. You are providing the minimum amount of information necessary to move the situation forward. This communicates that you are not interested in a long, drawn-out debate. It signals that your time is valuable and that you are not available for an emotional exchange. Brevity is the ultimate sign of confidence. It shows that you don't feel the need to over-explain yourself to be right. The second pillar is being informative. This means you stick strictly to the facts. You remove all statements, all blame, and all adjectives that describe the other person's character. Instead of saying, "You are being incredibly rude and ignoring my emails," which is an invitation to a fight, an informative response says, "The deadline for the report is Friday at 50 p.m. You are providing data, not drama. By staying informative, you keep the conversation in the logical part of the brain. You aren't attacking their ego, so they have less of a reason to trigger their defense mechanisms. If they try to pull the conversation back into the emotional mud, you simply repeat the information. You become a broken record of facts. This makes it very difficult for them to portray you as the difficult one to outside observers, because your record remains clean, objective, and focused solely on the task at hand. The third pillar is being friendly. This is often the hardest part for people who are rightfully angry, but it is the most strategically important. Being friendly in a BIF response doesn't mean you are being their best friend. It means you are using a civil, neutral tone to de-escalate the conflict. It's as simple as starting with, "Hello," or "I appreciate your input on this. Why do we do this?" Because it makes you look like the person in control. If they are being hostile and you respond with professional friendliness, their hostility looks ridiculous by comparison. It is a social checkmate. It also prevents them from going to third party and claiming you were abusive or unprofessional. Friendliness is the lubricant that allows the firm boundary you are about to set to slide into place without causing a massive friction fire. It keeps the door of the interaction polite so that you can close it firmly. The final pillar is being firm. This is the closing move. Being firm means you end the conversation or provide a clear, final answer that doesn't invite a follow-up. It's not about being mean, it's about being finished. A firm ending sounds like, "This is my final decision on the matter, and I won't be discussing it further," or "I look forward to receiving the file by tomorrow." You are setting a boundary that states the matter is concluded. Most people fail at being firm because they leave a gap at the end of their sentences, a question mark, or an apology that invites the other person to keep talking. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that." Okay. It's not firm. It's a plea for permission. "I am unable to fulfill that request at this time" is firm. When you combine these four elements, you create a communication style that is impossible to argue with. You are polite enough to be professional, but brief and firm enough to be untouchable. You aren't playing their game anymore. You've built your own court with your own rules, and the game ends exactly when you say it does. In the architecture of a conflict, we often believe that words are our bridge to resolution. But when dealing with a difficult personality, words are actually the ropes they use to tie you down. We have been socialized to believe that if we can just explain our why clearly enough, if we can just make them see our logic, our pain, or our intentions, they will finally understand and the conflict will end. We treat the other person like a rational judge who just needs more evidence to rule in our favor. But a difficult person is not a judge. They are a scavenger. They aren't looking for understanding, they are looking for handles. Every time you offer an explanation, you are giving them a new place to grip, a new detail to twist, and a new reason to keep the argument alive. When you say, "I can't come to the event because I'm exhausted and I have to work early tomorrow," you think you're being honest. What the difficult person hears is, there are 2 points you can now attack. They will tell you that you aren't actually that busy, or they'll suggest you just drink more coffee, or they'll accuse you of not valuing the relationship. By explaining, you have unknowingly invited them to negotiate your boundaries. The need to explain is actually a symptom of a deeper insecurity, a feeling that we don't have the right to simply say no or state a fact without justifying it to the world. We feel that a bare statement is too aggressive, so we wrap it in layers of justification to soften the blow. However, in the presence of a high-conflict individual, this softening is seen as a weakness to be exploited. Silence and brevity are much harder to argue with than a detailed defense. If you simply say, "I'm not able to do that," there is no handle for them to grab. There is no because for them to dissect. The moment you add, because, you have shifted the conversation from your decision to your reasons, and reasons can be debated. Decisions, however, are final. When you stop explaining, you are reclaiming the right to your own autonomy. You are operating from the position that your no is a complete sentence and your boundaries do not require a white paper to be valid. This shift in behavior is often the most disarming thing you can do to someone who is used to pulling you into the mud of a circular argument. Consider the mechanics of a typical power struggle. The difficult person makes a demand or an accusation, and you immediately feel the explanation itch. Your heart rate spikes and you begin to narrate your life to them, hoping for validation. But notice what happens to the power dynamic in that moment. The person asking for the explanation has become the interrogator and you have become the suspect. By explaining, you have implicitly agreed that they have the authority to question you and that you have the obligation to answer. You are auditioning for their approval. To stop explaining is to refuse the role of the suspect. It is a quiet, powerful declaration that you do not answer to their court. When you stop providing the handles, the other person will often become frustrated or even more aggressive because they've lost their leverage. They might say, "Oh, you're being defensive," or "Why won't you just tell me why?" The trap here is to explain why you aren't explaining. Don't do it. Simply smile or remain neutral and repeat your original statement. This is the broken record technique in its purest form. It signals that the door is closed, the lights are off, and there is no one home for the drama they are trying to sell. This practice also protects your internal peace by ending the mental rehearsal that happens after a confrontation. Most of us spend hours after an argument thinking of all the things we should have said to explain ourselves better. We are still trying to win the explanation game in our heads. But when you make the conscious choice to stop explaining in real life, you find that the mental noise quiets down as well. You realize that you don't need them to agree with your reasons for your boundaries to be effective. You stop caring if they think you're wrong or unfair because you've realized that their opinion of your reasons is none of your business. This is the ultimate form of emotional maturity. The ability to let someone be wrong about you without feeling the need to correct them. It saves an incredible amount of energy. You can take all that effort you used to spend on crafting the perfect defense and reinvest it into your own goals and your own peace. You begin to see that the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones saying the least. They aren't hiding, they just aren't giving away free handles for others to pull on. They state their truth, they set their limit, and they allow the silence to sit there heavy and final. By refusing to explain, you aren't just winning an argument, you are ending the cycle of conflict altogether. You are moving from a place of seeking permission to a place of exercising power. The most powerful thing you can do with a difficult person is to remain unchanged by them. Don't let their storm become your storm. Stay calm, stay brief, and keep your power. I'll see you in the next one.